When you think of Henry VIII, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Right, the 6 wives. It's what he's famous for. But that's really just the tip of the iceberg. The real story, the one we're going to dive into, is how one man's very personal crisis ended up forging an entire nation and, you could say, created the England we know today.
So take a look at this. On the one hand, you've got this young guy, charismatic, handsome, a total Renaissance prince. And on the other, well, this paranoid, obese, and pretty tyrannical king. The big question is, how on earth does one become the other? It's a shocking transformation, and the story of that change is the story of modern England.
Okay, so the first thing you have to understand about Henry is that he was never, ever supposed to be king. Not in a million years. He was the spare, right? Not the heir. That job belonged to his older brother, Arthur, who was being groomed for the throne pretty much from birth.
But then the unthinkable happens. In 1502, just 20 weeks after marrying the Spanish princess Catherine of Aragon, Arthur suddenly dies. And just like that, at only 10 years old, little Henry, the kid in the background, is now the heir. The entire future of the Tudor dynasty is now resting on his very small shoulders.
Now, you can't just throw away a major political alliance with Spain, so a plan was hatched. When Henry finally came of age at 17 and took the throne, he married his brother's widow, Catherine of Aragon. It was a political move, pure and simple. But this one decision, it set off a chain reaction that would change absolutely everything.
As king, Henry had one main job: produce a male heir. He had to secure the Tudor line and make sure the country didn't fall back into civil war. But this duty, well, it quickly spiraled into this desperate, all-consuming obsession that everyone at court started calling the king's great matter.
And wow, this table just lays out the tragedy in black and white. We're talking about nearly 2 decades of trying. Catherine went through at least 6 pregnancies, and almost every single one ended in heartbreak. Only one child, a daughter they named Mary, survived past infancy.
So, after 20 years of marriage, this was the situation. One king, one daughter, and no male heir. The entire Tudor dynasty was hanging by a single thread. Now, he had a daughter, which was something, but in the brutal politics of the 16th century, that just wasn't going to cut it. He needed a son.
Henry was a really devout Catholic, and he became absolutely convinced that his marriage was cursed. He even thought he found proof for it in the Bible, in the book of Leviticus, which says a man shouldn't marry his brother's wife. In his mind, God was actively punishing him. His marriage was a sham. And then, Anne Boleyn walked onto the scene. Henry was totally smitten with her, but she made a demand that literally changed history. She told him she wouldn't be his mistress. No, she would be his queen, or nothing at all. This completely forced his hand. He had to find a way to end his marriage to Catherine for good.
So naturally, Henry went to the Pope and asked for an annulment. But the Pope said no, probably because he was under a lot of pressure from Catherine's super powerful nephew. So, what does Henry do? He makes an absolutely revolutionary move. If the Pope won't play ball, then he'll just get rid of the Pope's power in England altogether.
Through a series of brilliant, and let's be honest, ruthless legal moves, Henry just severed 1,000 years of English religious history. It's wild. In just 3 quick steps, he cut off the Pope's legal power, made his marriage to Anne legit, and then declared himself the supreme head of the new Church of England. Just like that. Pope out, king in.
And this right here was the core of his new power. You see, by breaking with Rome, Henry wasn't just solving his marriage problem. He was fundamentally changing what it meant to be a king. He started arguing that his authority came directly from God, not from some pope in Rome, which basically made his power absolute. This was a revolution.
And this revolution, it unleashed a tidal wave of consequences that completely reshaped England. We're talking a cycle of new wives, a massive grab for wealth, and a reign of terror against anyone who even thought about standing in his way.
Of course, the most famous consequence is the whole 6 wives saga. Divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. His desperate search for a male heir led him through 6 different queens, and their fates pretty much depended entirely on his mood and, well, their ability to give him a son.
Next, to tighten his grip on power, and let's be real, fill up his treasury, Henry turned his attention to the wealthiest institution in the entire country, the church itself. He ordered the complete dissolution of England's monasteries, seizing all their vast lands and incredible riches for the crown. And let's put that into perspective. The annual income from these confiscated lands was £120,000. I mean, that is an enormous sum of money back then. It basically doubled the crown's income overnight. It was one of the biggest transfers of wealth in all of English history.
So what do you do with all that cash? You use it to build up your power. This new wealth directly paid for the creation of a permanent, professional Royal Navy. He also built a whole chain of new forts along the coast to defend the kingdom. He was really laying the groundwork for Britain's future as a global sea power.
But all this power came at a really terrible price. As Henry got older, his rule just got more and more brutal. He started using charges of treason to get rid of anyone who stood in his way. He even executed his most loyal advisors, guys like Thomas More and Thomas Cromwell, the moment they fell out of his favor. No one was safe.
So, after all that chaos, all that turmoil, what was his legacy in the end? I mean, he left England completely transformed for sure, but the cost was absolutely staggering.
Well, you have to give him this. In the end, he did succeed. He got his son, Edward. And amazingly, all three of his kids, Edward, Mary, and Elizabeth, would actually go on to rule England. He created a new national church, he centralized all the power with the monarch, and he founded the Royal Navy. But on the other hand, his constant wars and insane spending left the kingdom basically bankrupt. He built a new England, yeah, but it was built on a foundation of debt and religious chaos.
Which brings us right back to our big question. There's no doubt that Henry VIII was one of the most important kings in history. He secured his family's throne and set England on a totally new path. But was he some kind of forward-thinking visionary who was building a modern country? Or was he just a tyrant, driven by a monstrous ego, who remade an entire nation just to solve his own personal problems? You know, that's the question historians are still debating today.